Hello and welcome to my channel. I have another drawing of Ragnar from the Vikings, portrayed by Travis Fimmel. I already did a couple of drawings of him. This was done in charcoal. I'm going to take you through the drawing process. So let's have a look. This is another commissioned drawing, so I'm not obsessed with the TV series or with this particular character or anything. So it's another commissioned drawing of him. The previous one was done on a slightly smaller piece of paper, which was about 9 times 12 inches, and this one is 11 times 17 inches, so it's a fairly large portrait. After the initial sketch done with a graphite pencil, I'm moving on to charcoal. Let me just say a few words about the materials, because people often ask these things, and I'm kind of getting tired of answering these questions. These are Morrison woodless charcoal pencils. You can use any brand. Any charcoal pencil will do. It's just that I prefer woodless ones because they are easier to sharpen. For sharpening I use regular sharpeners, nothing special. For erasing, as you will see later on the beard, I'm going to be using a Kohinoor pencil eraser, which is basically just a regular eraser in a wood casing that looks like a pencil but can be sharpened. So as you can see, I'm doing some initial work on both the shading and the details, and I'm trying to shade some of the larger areas around the ears and around the eyes. But the thing is that I decided early on that I wanted to make this a slightly darker scene, and I wanted to have a slightly darker background, which is why all of this work that I'm putting down now will have to be reworked, and I will have to put down quite a bit more value on top later. So it was at this point that I decided, well, this is a little bit too light. I'm going to have to make everything a lot darker overall, because I'm trying to create also a little bit of background, and I want to create some contrast so that my subject stands out from the background. So initially I tried putting down some vine charcoal on the background, and I decided that it was still a little bit too light and too uneven. So I started adding some charcoal powder. Now this charcoal powder is something that I create myself by sharpening some of my charcoal pencils. And once I started adding the charcoal powder in combination with the vine charcoal, I was it was getting closer to what I wanted it to look like, because it was getting quite a bit darker. So I wanted some of these darker tones in the background. And the idea here, as you will see, is that once I create these areas of darker value, I will later proceed to clean up the edges between the subject and the background, so that the subject will stand out against the background. And of course I will need to create a sufficient amount of contrast so that some parts of Ragnar's head will be lighter, and in those areas the background will be darker, and this way hopefully with this contrast I will be able to create an illusion of depth and more of a 3D look to my subject's head and face. So I'm now shading the dome, the upper part of the head, and this is where all the tattoos will be, but I'm not moving on with the details right now. I'm just shading the larger areas. Now the thing is, because everything is so dark at this point, he almost looks like he's going to be a black person, but later, of course, when I shade everything else, you will see that his skin won't appear as dark. So everything is relative when it comes to shading, and you will see that contrast is very important, because it allows you to see whether an area is darker or lighter, because it depends on how dark or how light the area next to it really is. So now I'm going to do a little bit of work on these tattoos, and for this I will use a soft charcoal pencil because these need to be a little bit darker. And in my reference photo I can't really make out all of the details, honestly, because I don't really know what the symbols are on his head. I don't really have any additional information on that, and I don't really have any clear reference photos. So I'm just going to try to imitate the shapes that I see. I don't think that there is a reference photo where you could be able to see clearly what these tattoos are, what these shapes are, because obviously some of them are overlapping and some of them look kind of smudged, and that tends to happen with tattoos over time, especially low quality ones, and especially when you go over them multiple times, and plus he has some scars and injuries on his head, so that makes things even more complicated. But like I said, I'm just going to try to simplify things a little bit, shade the larger areas so that they resemble what I see in the reference photos, and I'm just going to try to imitate the shapes that I see so that they look kind of close to what the actor actually had on the show. And another tool which I'm using to refine the appearance of these tattoos is a tortillon. I also used brushes. So I'm going to use brushes and tortillons to soften the edges a little bit, because I don't want to produce too much texture and I don't want lines that are too clean and too well defined. So I'm just kind of going to blur everything a little bit. But as long as these shapes are still there, as long as they're visible, it's going to be good. I'm using a pencil eraser now to clean up the edge of the head, the back of the head here. I'm going to make that part a little bit lighter, like maybe some light is coming from the other side. And I'm going to shade, or rather I'm going to erase some of the charcoal on that side lightly, so that this part of the head looks a little bit lighter. But the other goal that I have is to create enough contrast with the background. That's why that part of the background is a little bit darker, because I want that part of the head to stand out against the background. So moving on to the neck here. And there's also going to be some tattoos here, but like I said, first I like to shade the larger areas. If I want to make a part of the background a little bit lighter, I can just dab that part of the paper with a paper towel or a tissue, and that way I can lift up some of the charcoal and create a lighter part of the background. Just adding a few more details to the tattoos. It's a very elaborate pattern, but like I said, can't really do much more other than trying to imitate what I see and make it look similar. So in terms of drawing tools, as you can see so far, I've used charcoal pencils and vine charcoal, and that's pretty much what I'm going to be using for this drawing. I'm not going to use any other types of pencils. I'm going to do most of the work with the pencil that I'm using now, and it's a medium charcoal pencil, and you can also see that I'm now pulling some highlights on the other side using a pencil eraser, because I want that part of the head, the forehead, to stand out against the background as well. So the lighting on my reference photo was a little bit tricky, but I've kind of managed to make some modifications because I really wanted to put in that background and I really wanted to achieve some contrast. Now here I'm moving on to the earlobe, and this can be a little bit tricky, so I need to pay attention to the anatomy. And the tricky part about the earlobe is that obviously there are a lot of these curved structures that I need to try to capture accurately. But in terms of drawing and shading, the problem with earlobes is that you have these transitions between sharper edges or cleaner edges and some smoother edges and softer transitions. So you need to examine the ear closely, and if you're trying to draw an accurate ear, you have to make sure that you have that you capture both the clean edges and the soft transitions accurately, so that the anatomy of the ear would look realistic. And because this is a fairly large portrait, I'm putting a lot more detail, and I'm focusing a lot more on this ear, giving it a little bit more attention than I would normally in smaller portraits. And plus he's turning to the side, so the ear is fully visible. Now if you look at the amount of value I'm putting down, the ear is going to appear a lot lighter than the rest of the head. The reason for that is not only because he has tattoos behind the ears, but also because I want the ear to stand out from the rest of the head, so that we can really feel like it's a separate body part which stands out or is protruding towards us, if that makes sense. And for drawing the ear, I use a combination of a medium charcoal pencil and a soft charcoal pencil, and I use that soft charcoal pencil to create a bigger range of value and make the earlobe more 3D, to deepen the earlobe. Although if you watched my video on how to draw ears, not everybody has earlobes of the same shape. Some people's earlobes are a little bit more flat, and others are quite a bit deeper, and the shadows are also deeper. So this one is a little bit deeper, so I'm trying to create a bigger range of value and create something that looks more three-dimensional. And now I'm drawing some more of these tattoos, which are going down the neck. So I'm just going to add a few more shapes there. Like I said, I'm simplifying things a little bit. I don't know if any of the viewers will complain that the tattoos are not accurate enough. I honestly don't really know what the symbols mean, and I'm pretty sure that most people don't either. So now I'm shading the forehead a little bit more. So you can see that the upper part of the head is largely done, and soon I'm going to be moving on to the face. Now here, these wrinkles on the forehead, in order to make them three-dimensional, as you can see, you have to shade them, keeping in mind that the light source is mostly coming from above in most cases. So even these lines, these wrinkles on the forehead, they still need to be shaded so that they look so that we know where the light is coming from. For smoothing the background, for making it smoother and softer and blending everything more thoroughly, I use a larger brush, because the larger the brush, the more even the blending will be. In some of the places on the background, I felt like I needed a little bit more value, so I added a little bit more using my pencils, and then I softened everything with a brush. And here I'm moving on to the eyes and the area around the eyes, and he has some kind of scars, or a scar above the left eye, or on the side of it as well. And I'm going to have to shade that as well so that I can kind of make it pop out from the rest of the face. I shaded the white of the eye using a brush just so that I don't leave it completely white. Now I enhance the appearance of that scar using a pencil eraser so that it stands out against the rest of the skin. And now I'm just shading around the eyes. And the nose, even though I think I'm going to have fewer of these highlights on the nose. So I still need to make this lower portion of the face a lot darker because the upper part of the head is pretty dark, but as you can see, now that I'm kind of making progress with the shading, the face no longer appears too dark. And now I'm going to work on the beard a little bit. And obviously his beard is blonde or partly blonde. He has some blonde hairs, and you may be wondering why I'm using a dark pencil. Well, because I need to create some depth in that beard and the mustache, so I first need to draw the darker areas first. So once I finish those, I will be able to create highlights on top of that. But I decided to move on to the nose for now and to shade a little bit more of the face before I move on to the beard and the mustache. And I also need to create a little bit of shadow under the beard on the neck here, which is why I used a soft charcoal pencil for this a little bit. The rest of the neck is going to be done with a medium charcoal pencil and vine charcoal. So as you can see, some parts of this process are very messy, and I also use a bit of charcoal powder to cover larger areas. Now the reason why I like to use charcoal powder in some areas, like for example here on the beard, is because it'll actually be easier to erase than if I used scribbling or regular strokes to cover that area. So if I used a charcoal pencil to cover the beard, some parts of it would be a little bit difficult to erase. So I tried establishing the base tone by putting down some charcoal powder. But I feel like I'll still need to make the beard a lot darker in order for the highlights to stand out. So it's all about creating more depth in your subject as well as his facial hair. In case you're wondering why I use a combination of vine charcoal and compressed charcoal in charcoal pencils, well, they both have their advantages and disadvantages. Oh, I wouldn't really call them disadvantages. It's just that some things are just easier with vine charcoal and some things are easier to do with a charcoal pencil. Vine charcoal is very easy to blend and move around, and on the other hand, it doesn't really give you much precision, so you have to keep that in mind. But charcoal pencils can be sharpened and they can be used to draw details and things like that. So a combination of the two is probably best. And I'm just going to keep shading the rest of the beard. And this part above the upper lip and under the mustache also needs to be very dark in order for the mustache to stand out as well. Now I'm adding a little bit more value on the beard because I felt like it's just not going to be dark enough. It's not going to be as dark as I wanted. These are some of the things that you need to keep in mind. If you created a dark background, you will need some areas of very dark value on your subject if you want the subject to have volume. If you don't do that, your main subject will appear flat, and it will kind of be, how should I explain that? It'll kind of, the background will be drawing too much attention. And in order for the subject to capture the attention of the viewer, you need to try to create more range of value on him, and also more textures and details and things like that. So you can see how nicely these darker areas, which I'm adding with a soft charcoal pencil, how nicely they are enhancing the overall range of value and creating more depth in the subject, especially around the eyes and the mouth. So I'm just putting down some finishing touches basically on the face, because I'm gonna need to move on to the beard. But I think the face is looking pretty good, and I'm just adding a little bit more of these scars and some lines around the mouth, and maybe adding a little more texture to the skin, because I want a rough texture. I don't want a smooth face, obviously. And maybe some indications of scars and injuries and things like that, because he is a warrior and you would expect that sort of thing. I'm just going to add a few more of these smaller, shorter hairs, which are kind of growing closer to the cheekbones. And I'm also adding a few more darker areas to the beard, because I really want the beard to be a lot darker before I start drawing the highlights. I'm going to shade the neck so that there are some indications of texture, skin texture there, but I'm not going to overdo it. My portrait doesn't need to be that detailed. I added a few more details on these tattoos. As before, I'm using a tortillon to smudge this a little bit, to smudge these shapes. Here I started working a little bit on his shirt, which is a form of interwoven leather armor, but I'm going to get to that later. I still need to do a little bit more work on the face and of course the beard, which is going to be one of the most complex parts of this drawing. I kept the camera close to the paper, fairly zoomed in, so that you can see most of the detail. I didn't really change the setting much, only later at the end, so that you can see the whole drawing. But here I'm starting to work on the beard, and I'm drawing some of these lighter hairs on top of the darker ones. And this is why you can see now it was so important for me to draw the darker areas first, so that these lighter areas would stand out. Once again, the tool that I'm using is an eraser. It's not a white pencil, it's an eraser. It's a Kohinoor pencil eraser. It's basically a rubber in a wood casing that can be sharpened. And I'm just drawing some random lighter hairs. Now, it's not going to be quite that simple. First, let me explain the approach that I used in some of the previous videos. On the previous large drawing of Ragnar that I did, and I'm going to put the link in the description and in the end screen, I used an indentation technique where I used a stick to create invisible lines, to carve these lines in the paper so that they would stand out once I cover them with charcoal. Here I simply used a different approach. I decided to use only an eraser. So basically I'm just drawing some darker areas first and using an eraser to draw these lighter hairs or highlights on top of that. But like I said, it's not going to be quite that simple, and you will see why. But first I'm doing a little bit more of the background on the right because I want that area to be darker as well. And the reason why I wanted to do that first is because I want the lighter hairs on the left side of that beard to stand out against the background on the right. So I want enough value there so that the lighter hairs would stand in contrast. And I use all kinds of blending tools to make that smoother and soften it and blend it well. So now I'm moving on to the rest of the beard, once again creating enough value as a base tone, and then I'm going to start drawing the highlights on top of that. And I want a sufficient amount of value, and I'll also need to have a slightly darker area under the beard, around the neck and on the chest, where there will be some shadow coming from the head and the beard. Alright, so right now the right side of that beard is not very well defined, and I'm just putting some more charcoal there to make that darker, to be able to create even more contrast. And I'm adding some more value to the lower portion of that beard as well. I am just going to use vine charcoal to add some value to this shirt he's wearing. I'm not going to draw any details for now, just putting down some charcoal to give myself a rough idea how dark it's going to be, and also because I need a little more value so that the beard would stand out as well. Alright, so now I'm going to start doing a little bit more work on the beard. Occasionally I have to resharpen this pencil eraser. So I'm just drawing some curvy lines that kind of look like lighter hairs on the beard. And like I said, my approach is not quite as simple as just drawing some white lines. It's going to be done in several stages, because whenever I draw these lines, I just tend to go over them with a brush lightly. And that way, when I go over them with a brush, they become a little less white. So when I draw new white lines on top of those, I am kind of creating more density and more depth in that beard, if that makes sense. So what I want to make it look like is I want to make it look like the beard is really thick, and like there are some layers of hairs in that beard. And that's why here I'm also adding a little bit of that soft charcoal pencil in between the lighter hairs. Normally I wouldn't recommend this, but I felt like more contrast was needed, so I'm kind of blending that with a brush. And some of these white lines are disappearing now, some of them will still remain. It's not a big problem. I will go over it once again with a pencil eraser, but I thought that more contrast was needed, and I think I was right. So I started drawing some new lighter hairs on top of that. And when you draw these lighter hairs on top of the ones that have been kind of muddied or blended in and kind of subdued, you get the impression like there are some hairs on top of the other hairs, like maybe some of them are deeper in the beard and are therefore in the shadow, and the ones sitting on top are lighter because they're getting more light. So that's basically the effect that I'm trying to create, but it's all about creating enough depth in your beard so that it kind of looks more realistic. And another thing that's important if you want to make the beard realistic is that you have to vary those shapes. You have to create those curved shapes, and you have to kind of vary the direction at least a little bit so that it looks kind of realistic and organic and not artificial, and so that these lines don't look too uniform. But I do have to resharpen that pencil eraser every now and then so that I can get cleaner lines. This part around the mouth was a little bit tricky. That's why you could see me fidgeting with it, because the thing is that the mustache are kind of distorting the facial features a little bit, so I found myself going back and trying to fix that area over and over again until I was finally happy with the way it turned out. As you can see, this is going to be a slightly longer video. We're already half an hour into the video, and I deliberately wanted to make a slightly longer video because I didn't want to speed up too much. Normally for YouTube I post narrated time lapses, and some of them are shorter than the others, but this whole drawing took about 4 hours in real time, so I tried not to speed it up too much so that you can have a better idea of so that you can get a better idea of what I'm doing, and so that you can understand my approach to drawing this beard and shading the face. But if you want to see longer videos as they were captured in real time, if you want to see full-length narrated videos, you should check out my Patreon. Normally these types of videos would be boring for a regular viewer, but if you're interested in drawing and you want to see how this was done in real time, and you want to see the full-length video, I recommend you go to my Patreon, and there you can find plenty of full-length videos, dozens of them literally, and eventually there will be hundreds, all of them narrated with lots of tips. And you can also find some other content, and you can support me naturally if you like my channel. So anyway, I started working on this shirt, and let me just explain quickly what I'm doing here, because it's a little bit complicated and I'm going to try to simplify it a little bit. So it's made out of leather as far as I can see, and the leather consists of these straps which are interwoven, and it's a very complicated, elaborate design. But the way I see it is we have the ones that are going vertically, and those which are connecting them and which are going horizontally through them. So I kind of try to imitate that pattern as best as I can. Maybe it's a little bit more complicated than that, but like I said, I like to simplify things when it comes to clothes, and the same goes with the armor. And this is a type of leather armor, I think, or something of a sort. I don't really know. I'm not really an expert on that. But I tried my best to make it look similar to what I see in my reference photo. And the key to making this look realistic and not making it look crappy is really the shading, so that it stays consistent with the light source which is coming from above. So I'm shading each and every one of these segments so that the part of those straps, or whatever they are, which are facing upwards are lighter, and those which are facing downwards are darker. So basically trying to stay consistent with the light source in my shading. That's as long as you do that, I think whatever you draw will appear fairly realistic. But naturally I can't really imitate the appearance, the exact appearance of that shirt, and I don't really need to. I feel like I don't need to. I want to focus on the portrait, and I only did as much of the hair as I did because I had to draw on this large piece of paper, which is, like I said, 17 inches in height. So I couldn't fill everything with a face, and it would look kind of weird. So I needed a little bit more of the shoulders and the chest, and a little bit more of the background, so that I would make the portrait stand out nicely. But right now I'm putting down some finishing touches on the head and the face because I'm pretty happy with the way everything came out. And I'm just doing a little bit more work on these tattoos. I added some more value around the ear to deepen the shadows there, but I'm also kind of making some of these shapes on the tattoos a little bit more blurry because honestly I wanted them to look like old crappy tattoos, and I'm hoping that I'm achieving that look. I also hope that the lighter hairs on the beards stand out enough in terms of contrast against the background. So those are some of the things that are important to me. I'm pretty happy with the way the face came out. I have a nice amount of texture on the skin, and of course I cleaned up the edges of the head, and I tried to make the head stand out against the background using contrast with the darker portions of the background. I needed to rework this scar here a little bit, so I added a few more details and made some parts of it a little bit darker, and that's pretty much all the work that I plan to do in that area. But I'm just softening some of the lines on the beard and around the nose as well, trying to clean up some of the edges. These are just the finishing touches. Overall, I like the way the portrait came out. When I started working, it appeared like it's going to be a little bit too dark, but that's the way it is when you're working with charcoal. It often ends up being just a little bit darker than you intended, because charcoal is already pretty dark, but I think I created a very nice range of value, and I think the portrait still looks fine in spite of the fact that it's a little bit darker. I didn't want a clean white background. I think it looks better this way. It would have been a lot easier without the background, but I think it looks better this way, and I think the subject is allowed to stand out a little more due to the contrast. So I've put down the finishing touches, and this is what the finished drawing looks like. It's already been sprayed with a fixative, and I always fix my drawings with a ton of fixative spray. I signed the drawing in the lower right corner, so that's pretty much it. That's the finished drawing. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Give me a like, comment, and if you want to see longer videos and full-length videos, don't forget to check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.